Please help me welcome Brian.
I've got some handouts too. Looks like enough, 15 or so, but if you want to take a look at some of the just key slides that I'll be going over, plus a couple of the handouts I'm going to mention. If you don't get a copy, just let me know. I can email them to you as well. All right, thanks for coming. So I wanted to start off, just get familiar with your guys' background and where your company's at. So if I can get a raise of hands on the questions that pertain to you. First one is, do you have a sustainability department, or do you know somebody in your organization that has responsibility to work on sustainability? Does anyone have a program? A couple of you? Okay. How about, do you have your ES&H group or facilities group in your improvement events? And do you invite them to it? Yep. Okay, good. Does your ES&H group and facility group have their own process improvement events? Half of you, okay? All right. Have you had any dedicated projects or events around energy reduction, trash, water, toxins, specifically? Focused on that? Okay, good, good. Do you know how much you're spending on electricity, solid waste, water? Do you know about what the cost is at your facility? Okay, that's good. Some other groups I've talked to, very few hands go up on a lot of these questions, so that helps me judge us a little bit. So what we're going to talk through today is, how does your Lean Six Sigma, how can it help with environmental sustainability? And so we'll do a little bit of education, a little bit of experiences that I've had at my company, and then at the end here we'll kind of wrap up with some resources and open up for questions. So most of you are probably familiar or have seen this diagram before about sustainability, but sometimes there's confusion about what sustainability is. And so it is, how do we maintain things in the long run, but from a business standpoint, what we look at is how can the company survive in the long run? Whether it's 7 generations into the future, or whether it's 1,500 years in the future, but it's really trying to get companies to look at the long-term view of their company and how can they do business that's going to keep them around for a long time. And so to look at the 3 areas, and not only just make decisions around profit, but look at how does it impact people and how does it impact the planet. And how do we make decisions that try to incorporate all the ideas and impacts of those into our decision making. So I'm going to spend a lot of the time talking about the environmental part of the planet side of this, but there's a whole other aspect around people and social, and I think a lot of your initiatives do a pretty good job of bringing employee engagement into the picture, getting your companies out into the communities and donating time and volunteering, and so that's a whole other aspect that I'm not going to deep dive into today. So, for example, when we talk about triple bottom line, which is another phrase that's used, transportation to getting to the conference. So we all have different options of getting here, and maybe it's transportation to actually get to Dallas, or if you're in the Dallas area, how did you get to this conference today? Did you stay in this hotel? And so there's basically 0 transportation involved. You just walk down from your room. Or did you stay outside of Dallas somewhere and you drove your car in and parked it in the parking garage? Or did you get an Uber here? Or did you take mass transit and take the train in? So all those have different cost models. They also have an impact on the people, the workers in the company you supported. You're supporting Uber, you're supporting mass transit and the group that runs that. Maybe you biked in. So what kind of bike service did you use? Did you bring your own bike? Did you rent one? Who are the people that are providing those services to you? And how does that factor in your decision making? Are those the type of companies you want to support? And then what kind of impact on carbon and impact on the environment does your decision have? So those are all the things that you want to consider. So despite the many different things to think about, in a perfect world, all that would be wrapped up into the price, right? If they were using unfair labor practices, then hopefully their prices would be higher. And if they were polluting with their products and services, hopefully their products would be more expensive. But if you have looked around a little bit, that's not how things are set up right now. Our economic models don't reflect that directly. So sometimes the cheaper option is more damaging on the people and planet side. And so until we get to a point where that starts to balance out, we can still justify some financial reasons to be more sustainable. And this was a calculator tool that Bob Willard put together, and highly recommend you use this. And what we did is went through and plugged in some numbers about our company. Put in how much sales do we have, what's the average employee salary, how much do we spend on materials costs. I think it's looking at profit margin, stuff like that. You plug in some really high level numbers, most that you can get out of your financial statements. And what he does is breaks up and looks at, here's the opportunity, based on what other companies have done, here's the type of financial benefits you can get by becoming more sustainable. And in these 7 different categories. So the first one would be increased revenue, which would be, I provide a product or service that wasn't available, but I'm bringing in a new customer base. Or I'm offering them a different option that they like. And maybe it's even a little bit more expensive. And so there might be additional revenue that can be generated from that. The other next three here have to do with focused efforts around reducing the impact on those areas. Energy, water, material costs. Moving from raw materials into more recycled materials, or minimizing the amount of materials needed. And solid waste and hazardous waste expenses. Focused efforts around those, which a lot of you have already done, continue to bring those costs down. That can be a positive thing to the bottom line. There's also increased employee productivity that is a result of the improvements and getting people engaged. And as people look at their company that they work for and see that they're doing the right things, there's productivity gains right there. It says, I'm working at a company that cares about the environment. They don't care about just making money. And there's some natural productivity that comes with that. There's also a reduction in employee attrition expenses. So when you lose somebody who leaves and says, I'm going to go work somewhere else that I feel like more passionate about what their mission is or what they're trying to do for the community, then you have to backfill in the short term. So everybody else takes up the slack for the missing time. Then they got to post a job. They got to interview some people. They have to go through a lot of extra expenses and then onboard that person. And then the people that we're filling in have to probably train them up. And so there's a huge productivity loss and expenses going with getting more people. And so if you can increase productivity and make employees happy to work there, they're less likely to leave, and you have less attrition costs. And then finally, looking at risks. So if you're doing the right things, you're less likely to run into problems from a legal issue or a regulatory perspective. And so the more you're getting ahead of this and looking at these things, and even if something does go wrong, you can say, look, we were trying to work on these things. You're going to come off in a much better light than if it's something, well, we just ignore that, or we were covering up something, or we weren't even paying attention to that. You're setting yourselves up in a much better situation if something did go wrong. But on the website, there's a little tool that would go in there. And when we did this, it was in the millions of dollars of opportunity when you roll up those numbers. And so that's some of the information I've been forwarding on to our investor relations group and our finance group and saying, hey, I think this is something, even if it's a fraction of that millions of dollars, this is something we need to look at pretty seriously. So that in itself can justify some of your program. So I want to start looking at how do we start with lean and see how it benefits the green side of things. So here was a picture in our factory. As you can see, there are a lot of push carts around there. And it's messy and it's cluttered. And it allowed us to have excess inventory. And it looked like it was important stuff, but it was just a place to store things. And it hid problems. And of course, we know that that's not a good thing. And it took a floor space. So that was an area we first looked at in this area and said, how do we deal with these carts? And what do we do? So we went through, did some 5S, added some floor markings, and it turns out we actually have to replace those carts. we're going to go to more ESD friendly carts. And so there was an order that they had set up for 54 replacement carts, and that's how many were in the cell, which is a lot. After the event, and when we started actually looking at how many need to actually be here, it was actually down to 30, which is still a lot of carts, but we're working our way down to a smaller number. But that in itself, the reduction of 24 carts was about $10,000. So that wasn't really the goal going into it, but when we started to capture the environmental impact of that, which would be if you're preventing the purchase or the manufacturing of a product, for each 1 pound that you save, it's actually 19 pounds upstream when you look at the starting raw material level. And by the time you cut and process everything down and all the waste in that process, you end up getting 1 pound out of the 19. So when you look at that perspective, preventing the purchase of something is actually a very big environmental impact. And we happen to get a cost savings out of it. So one thing is just capture some of the environmental benefits that you're already getting, or start to look for those opportunities when you're doing your improvements. EPA came out with a table in one of the guidebooks that I'll reference in the back here. It's called the Environmental Professional's Guide to Lean and Six Sigma. And they show that when you look at the different types of waste, these all come with an environmental impact as well. For example, if we overproduce, then we've got extra products that will spoil or may become obsolete, then we got to dispose of them or deal with them in some way. If we have inventory, we have to heat, cool, and light that area, and that's space that we're paying rent on. So that's an impact, and if we can reduce those problems or reduce the inventory, maybe we don't need that much space. Maybe we can rent out that space to someone else. Maybe we can downsize the area that we have. Or maybe we can put in more product or more services or bring in more people into that space without getting a new space. Transportation, obviously there's fuel that goes along with transportation. Usually when I move something, I have to package it up. So I put it in a box, or I wrap it up in bubble wrap, and then I tape it up. And that's labor. And then someone on the other side has to unpack it. And there's more labor there. Defects, of course, then I gotta deal with the defects. If I have to scrap out parts, or I have to throw away something, that's going into my solid waste costs. And there's processing and paperwork that goes along with those as well. And then waiting, if I've got things that are sitting on a shelf, or I'm waiting for something to process, well, all the equipment's still running, the lights are still on, and things that are sitting there are more likely to get damaged, knocked over, or they might become outdated or spoiled, depending on what your products are. So every time you see the lean waste, think about the environmental waste that go along with that. So it helps not only help you identify the full picture of the waste, but it can also help justify some of the business case around the improvements. Say not only will it address our flow issues or our quality issues, but it actually reduces some of our trucking costs and some of our solid waste costs. And that can help push that project over and get funded, or help with a return on investment on certain improvements. Another thing you want to look at is, the question comes up is, well, we need electricity and we need the lights. These are important parts of our business, and that's true. And so how do we separate out value-added uses of energy and materials from non-value-added? And let's start with a focus on the non-value-added first, because that's going to be easier to address. So yes, I need electricity to put parts on a board or to run that piece of equipment. But do I need it to stay and work overtime because of a problem where I got to keep the lights on and work late? Or come in on the weekend to deal with a problem that happened? Do I need that energy to keep a projector running in a conference room because I walked out and no one turned it off? Or cool an area that nobody's using, that's just sitting idle and nobody's working in that area? Those are the areas you would start with and saying, how do I get rid of the non-value-added applications? Then I can start looking at, maybe I can try to green up the sources of energy where I do have value. And I want to just come up with more renewable energy options or a greener source of electricity. So obviously stuff like lighting up the parking lot at night to make it more safe. That's a value-added reason to use electricity. And your customer doesn't want to pay for non-value-added waste. So this is a good place to start, is attack some of these non-value-added opportunities. And you can find those through some Gemba walks, and I'll talk about that. Another thing I want to introduce is the waste pyramid. How many of you have a pretty good recycling program at your work? Most of you? Okay. And so a lot of companies say, well, we're doing recycling, so we're doing pretty good. But if you look at this pyramid it's really kind of a decision-making pyramid of where does recycling fall? It's actually towards the bottom of the list. And so the first question is really refusal and saying, do I actually need this in the first place? So let's take a look at water bottles, for example. So the first question is, do I need a water bottle? And it's like, well, yep, I'm on the go, and it's I don't have any other thing to put it in, so yep, I need it for this opportunity. But maybe in the future, I'm going to bring my own water bottle container, or maybe there's a drinking fountain I can use to, basically quench my thirst, and that's the real goal. So, the first question is, can I refuse the water bottle in the first place? The reduce part would be, can I cut down the size of the water bottle that I need? Maybe there's a big liter size, but I only need the 12-ounce size. So if I can choose a smaller size, that's less material that went into that processing. So I'm still going to use the water bottle, but just not as much material. Or maybe I select an option that has recycled plastic instead of virgin plastic. So that'd be an example of reduce. Reuse would be, all right, I'm going to use a water bottle, but I'm going to use it many times throughout the day and maybe the next day or two. So I'm going to get a lot of extra use out of it than what it was intended for. And so then I'm going to, I still use the water bottle, but I'm now getting more life out of it. So that'd be an example of reuse. And then recycle would be, okay, I'm done with it. Now I'm going to take it somewhere where it's going to get recycled into some other product and get reused somehow that way. There's also another one called recover, which has to do with burning or incinerating the water bottle and taking the energy that's stored in the bottle and using that for heat, which would then power a turbine and generate electricity from. So there's actually facilities that are set up for incineration. And then if none of these other options are available, then you can look at dispose, where it's going into the landfill. Okay, so just want to kind of highlight that there's some other decisions up front ahead of recycling. You also are going to start to hear more about zero waste. Does anyone have a zero waste facility or is working towards zero waste? You guys are? Okay, good. Yeah, so that is, I think you're going to hear more and more of that coming through, and facilities are going to start looking at that and say, we want to achieve that level. And usually it's about 90% or more of your waste gets recycled, or you can capture some of the reuse and reduction activities you've done. And you can do some incineration, but it can't be more than like 10% of the total waste. There's also another acronym around waste, and this is used for trying to determine where is our biggest impact in our company that we should be focused on. So W would stand for water, A would be air emissions, S would be solid waste, T would be toxins or hazardous waste, and E would be energy. So if you're thinking about, well, what is my company, what kind of impact does it have on the environment? If you think about those 5 categories, maybe if you can get some numbers around that, or get some, how much do we spend, how much do we consume in each of those categories, that can help steer your improvement efforts into those areas. And this came out of a training I took. It was a green manufacturing specialist training through Purdue University. It's their technical assistance program. So I thought it was a pretty good tie-in with Lean, with using the WASTE acronym. So how many of you would say that water is your biggest problem area, or the one you guys are focused on right now in terms of reducing water? Anyone looking at water? You guys? Okay. How about air emissions? Yeah, it depends on the industry a little bit, whether that's a big importance or not. How about solid waste? Quite a few. Is that a cost thing on your guys' end? Okay. How about toxins or hazardous waste? Yeah, that can be pretty costly. How about energy? Yeah, most groups, energy is usually pretty high up there in terms of impact or cost impact. So I would recommend is think about these 5 categories and then think about which one's most impactful, what is the one that your company is most impacting on the environment. And then maybe you do some focused lean improvements around that area. So the other approach is then taking the green approach and seeing some lean benefits that come from that. So this was a picture I took at our transfer station. So we have a service that picks up our waste, and then they take it to a transfer station, and then it gets processed and put in the right categories, and then the trucks go off and take it to the different areas. So I met up over at the transfer station and did kind of a very simple go and see activity, and took pictures of what was dumped out of our dumpster. And you can see there's a lot of pink foam and black foam and white packing material, and all that is coming from suppliers. So we definitely identified in our solids area, that would be an opportunity to look at where all this is coming from and try to look for opportunities. Because there's processing and labor that goes along with these. So yeah, this might not cost us a lot of money to dispose of, but if we start thinking about the labor that goes along with dealing with it, now you start thinking about the real financial impact of this stuff. So one of the suppliers, we've set up a reusable packaging system. This is our visor product, and so it's actually just a piece of glass, kind of like a motorcycle shield. And it's easy for us to tell how many we have because they're the only ones in the yellow box in our factory. It breaks down easily. It's fairly inexpensive. And the real nice benefit from a lean perspective is kind of created a Kanban system by accident. So now when we ship back a box full of these containers, packaging containers, they know how much we consume. And it's like basically fill those back up because that's how many we've consumed of those. So it's kind of creating an automatic system like that by default. But there's also a lot of benefits from a packaging standpoint. So it takes less time for them to package it into that box. And it takes less time for us to unpackage it. And so there's some savings there. Even if it costs a little bit more to ship back and to process it, I think we're getting more savings on the labor side. So that's another way to look at some of these opportunities. And again, this one is kind of a win-win because we got some of our, we're able to reduce down some of our solid waste, but we're also seeing gains in our labor and productivity. How many of you have been through or done like a Gemble Walk or Go and See event? Okay. So this one is around energy, and that is our biggest one, is our energy consumption. And most of it is electricity. So in our corporate office, we actually set up about 6 or 7 different Go and Sees. And the idea was that we would go during different times of the day and of the week to look at how energy is being used, and most of it was outside of the working hours. Because it's usually that's where everybody's looking. But we want to start with like an off-shift time, like a weekend, or an evening where nobody's there. You will learn a lot from that first one. That's probably the most powerful point. So even if that's the only place you look, and you only spend an hour doing it, you're going to get some easy takeaways from that. We actually did that the day after Christmas this year. We have a shutdown over the last 2 weeks of the year. And we came in when nobody was there, and there's a lot of things that we learned. We learned some of our occupancy sensors aren't working properly. So lights are on and they're not supposed to be. That's stuff you wouldn't really tell during the day. You start hearing things running. That's something you wouldn't notice when everything's, there's people there and it's cloud, and it's really noisy out. You don't hear some of the stuff that's running. And then the other the period would be the starting up of the shifts. So that could be at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. and you're trying to see what happens when people walk in. Do they flip on all the equipment and all the lights, or do they just turn on the stuff as they need it? And what happens when you have breaks or during the shift? If they're done with that machine, do they shut it off, or do they leave it on their whole shift? And what happens during a shift change or at the end of the day? How do things get handled? So you're kind of making observations around these specific areas. And then you'll come up with a list of questions, and then you go back and interview the employees and say, I noticed you did this. Can you explain why this is that way? Or have you thought about ways we could shut off the equipment or turn that down? Or just really start engaging the employees in some of the discussion. And you want to have a mixture of people on those teams. So you can have a manager, you can have hopefully a couple of workers in the area, people who are familiar and people who are not familiar with the area, so they can ask some questions that might seem obvious or not so obvious to people who aren't always working in that area. But they want to have some knowledge to be able to answer, oh, we use this for this purpose, we use this for that, we use that all the time, we don't use that very often. So a mixture of even levels of management is good. And then if you have a large area, you can break up into small groups and send out smaller teams to different areas. So one of the things that came out of that was the air leaks, being able to identify and hear those air leaks. That it's just too noisy during the day, or people get so used to it that they just block it out. And so that led to a huge effort to go through and kind of clean up a lot of the air leak activity. We also did a Six Sigma project on electricity in our corporate office as well. So we started, and this is a Pareto of energy usage by facility. So it was very clear when I made that chart where to focus our attention. That is our corporate location. We went through and tried to piece together a pie chart of where the energy was going. That was a massive amount of work. And this piece is unknown. So we only got about half of it figured out. But what we figured out is these pie chunks are very large, and there's enough opportunity in there, hundreds of thousands of dollars, that we don't have to get the rest of the 50%. We can go off and start working something. So that's what we did. We went down the path of, I think it was heating and cooling system, or HVAC system. We also did some regression modeling and tried to figure out, well, what drives our energy? Is it the outside temperature? Yes, that's important, and that drives it. Is it our production rates? No, it actually wasn't anything to do with how much production volume we had. We said, well, maybe it's how many days of the month we work. Each dot represents a month of data. And then, so the red is our model, and the black line is actual usage. So we're trying to get fairly close to matching that pattern. But one thing that was interesting is that how many days we worked in the month had nothing to do with the electricity. So that was really interesting. You'd think like, well, if you work 15 days in a month or 25, that would affect your bill. Well, not really. It was minor if it did. So then it's like, then it starts taking down a path of why doesn't that match? Well, let's look at the base load. And when we started getting some more detailed data, we saw that we actually carried a huge amount of energy all during the day, even at night. And so then we started digging into some of that. Well, it turns out we had, there was a decision made a couple years ago that they're just going to leave the temp settings 24/7 where they're at, just in case people came in at different times. So we didn't want to discourage employees from coming in at odd times to do work. So I think they came up with a really good solution here, and we did some surveys of each area. When do you work normally? What type of work do you have? Are you in a lab setting where maybe temperatures are really important? Are you in just an open work area or an office area where the temperatures aren't that critical? So then we set up some temp ranges or some time ranges, from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. It's going to be this temperature, and then after those time periods, we're going to adjust it high or low depending on the season. But to deal with the change management around that, they put in these temperature adjustment buttons. And so basically, if anyone was in an area and they didn't like the temperature or they're uncomfortable, they could press the button and it would go back to that set point for like 2-hour period. And so, the first week or two, we did a pilot, and it got pressed a couple times. And then after that, there wasn't anybody pressing the button, and we didn't get any complaints. So that, I think just knowing that option was available, that they could always override the system, really helped the engagement and the deployment of that. And that would end up being about $300,000 in savings by doing this offset. And then it really stuck because I think we had that adjustment button available. So at the site I'm at now, I've been there about 3 years, so we have a green team. We switched over to 30% recycled paper from 0%. We'd like to go to 100% in the future. We set up a composting program. We changed out our cleaners to the third-party certified green cleaners. We just got an electric vehicle charging station put in. Pretty excited about that. And then we set up something called the green bag sessions, which is employees come in and we each have about a 30-minute block around lunchtime, kind of like a brown bag, lunch and learn type of thing. But they get to share something that they're really passionate around the environment. Maybe it's about their electric vehicle that they just got. One of them was how they take the bus 2 hours a day each way from another state, which is a really fascinating discussion. Another one was around food choices and the impact it has on the environment. One is about organic gardening at home. And so we're trying to find out which employees have passion around certain topics and then have them share that with other employees. Because we can have experts come in and talk about these topics, but it's much more powerful, I think, if you have people that you know and you work with. You can say, hey, I saw your presentation. I got some detailed questions, or I want some help with this. How did you overcome this? Or how's your apartment complex deal with composting? Those are something they can go talk to somebody they know or get to know at work. And there's some side benefits that go along with networking at work that this can create. So I think that's been pretty good. And then we've got the Go and See event we did last year, and then we've got the Six Sigma project we're still in the middle of. So we've got some proposed ideas. One didn't get funded, so now we're going back and looking at another improvement idea. We also went through a county certification program. That really helped get us going in the right direction. It was like a list of 80-some questions, and we had hit like 55 of the 80 questions to get certified. So if anyone wants to get a copy of that, I can send that to you. But it's a good place to start from in terms of a checklist to say where are we at today and what are some simple things we can do to get moving in the right direction. And the efforts at this site have actually kind of trickled back to our corporate group. And so we have a goal this year to get green teams set up at all of our facilities. And we've got our facilities director, senior facility director at our corporate office on board. And we're looking at putting together more of a broader sustainability program. So we've had one in the past, kind of fell apart, and now we're trying to refresh that. But I think our momentum at this site has started that discussion. So even if you work at a small facility in a large corporation, there's ways you can influence by the work that you've done. We also are ISO 9000 and ISO 14000 certified. Others have success with this. This isn't just something that we've come across. This is also out of the EPA Toolkit. 3M has seen reductions in VO's volatile air emissions by 60%, and a lot of that through their Lean and Six Sigma improvements. Columbia Paint reduced their paint solid waste and wastewater by significant amounts, and Whitfield Manufacturing reduced VOC and solid PVC waste through Lean improvements. And this is specifically at a value stream mapping event. And IBM has put a quote out that said they have offset the expenses of green improvements by 2 to 1. So every dollar they're spending on these, they're getting $2 back. So that's a pretty big company that would make a statement like that. So to tie back to this conference, businesses have a responsibility. They can't just say, we only do this for the profit. Or our stakeholders demand we hit our quarterly numbers. Well, or our stockholders. But I would argue that a lot of the stockholders don't just look at the quarterly. They don't want this quarter to look good and the next couple of quarters to look bad. They really do, most of them would want you to say, we would expect you to make the right long-term decisions. But sometimes that pressure of quarterly results for a publicly traded company can be a lot of pressure. But businesses need to take those into consideration, people and the planet. And that's to stay in business in the long run. That's the real purpose. those that are leading the sustainability efforts are seeing positive impacts on their business. It's not something that's going to cost extra, like maybe there's perception around that. And as Lean Six Sigma professionals and experts, we have the right skill set to do this. So we can take those same skills and apply it to water and air emissions and solids and energy. It's the same approach, the same tools can be used, it's just a little bit of tweaking, and I'll talk about that in a second. So what impact can you have in your company? Or if you feel like I don't have the opportunities there, what can you do in your community to share your skills and your knowledge? Maybe there's a nonprofit that could use your help. So whether you like the people side of it better or the planet side of it, there's opportunities and there's lots of groups that could use your skill set. So that's something I'm really passionate about, is trying to spread the knowledge that you guys have. Because you talk to other groups and they don't know much about Lean or Six Sigma, and so they're open to new ideas like that. So there's a couple gaps with Lean and Six Sigma. Usually when we're looking at the manufacturing flow or your office processes, you're really focused on the Gemba. But a lot of the opportunities from the environment are outside of there. It's the lighting and electricity, the heating and cooling, and the pipes. And those are often hidden. And so we got to look outside of that area. And that's what like the Gemba walks at different times of day is set up to do. There's also problems from, hey, this is just the cost of doing business. We got to use it for a certain amount of electricity. And they're not looking at that as an opportunity. Or they're looking at it as a very specific, this equipment only costs us $20 a day for electricity, versus, hey, we're spending $5,000 a day in electricity. So when you raise it up at a higher level, it builds more of a bigger number that makes it more like an opportunity there. But sometimes they're looking at it too narrow of a piece. Sometimes the costs get blanketed across by how much square footage that department uses or how many employees they have, and it's not always tied to who's using the most amount of that. Who's generating the most hazardous waste? Are they paying for their full share within your company, within your building? Oftentimes that's not the case. So what's the incentive to their budget to go fix that? Sometimes that's part of the problem. And Lean doesn't necessarily always look at the quality of the content material coming in. They're not looking at, is this recycled material versus virgin material? Is it a clean energy source versus energy from coal or other fossil fuels? Or is it a hazardous material that you're using in your machine, or is it a cleaner material? Those aren't necessarily a focus around a lot of improvements. And externality costs, the full impact, those aren't always hitting the company bottom line. So if they're polluting something in the air, are they really paying the full share in the healthcare costs that are incurred in the community? Probably not. So businesses don't always get the full bill for what they're contributing to the problem. Or sometimes side benefits are not known or anticipated. So one example is if you have a take-back program where you go and say, after your customers are done using your product, you said, we'll take it back from you and we'll handle it properly, get it put in the right spot, break it down, recycle it, do something. And you might see that as a cost, but what you might not realize is the opportunity to interact with your customer, find out how they're using your product, find out ideas that they would like for enhancements to your product, sell them a new version of the product. And that is huge benefits, not just, it's going to cost us money to deal with this product. So some of those aren't known, and so it's harder to justify. ES&H, they do a pretty good job from the bottoms-up approach. So if you have an ES&H group, they can handle a lot of the stuff with turning off equipment, recycling, composting, hazardous waste processing, looking for air leaks. Facilities can do a better job of the top-down approach, looking at the utility bills and the costs, and looking for energy upgrades or efficiency upgrades, renewable energy, LEED building certification, putting in showers for bikers to encourage different ways of commuting to work. So the combination of the two groups can really do a good job of helping drive this program. Here's a value stream map. One thing you could do is start to add in some of the water usage or electricity usage into the data boxes of your value stream map. Or you can add another timeline at the bottom, that is the amount of material that's going through those processes. So we take 30 gallons of water in and only 25 comes out. So we're losing 5 gallons in that process area. And maybe that will help you identify some opportunities that way. In a SIPOC diagram, make sure that environment is one of the customers that gets put on there, so that they get considered as a stakeholder in that process. Or if you've seen this SQDC or QDIP charts where you put a green or a red color in each day of the week, whether you met your goal for safety or quality or delivery, maybe there's one you add in for environment. And it has to do with, did we shut off our equipment at the end of the day? Did we properly recycle everything we're supposed to? Did we follow the hazardous waste guidelines? Some other tools, Jacksonville did some work where they added greening into their DMAIC model. So before they did some improvements, they evaluated the environmental impact of those improvements. So it's DMAGIC instead of DMAIC. I thought that was pretty interesting. And then there is an OEE, I think it's Infor, that recommends you could add in energy consumption of your equipment as a fourth element of OEE. And that, usually the equipment starts to use up more energy as it starts to wear or something's going wrong with it, and you can see that in the energy usage. So that would bring down your OEE score, if you're familiar with OEE. There's a couple checklists in the handout that are pretty useful. If your ES&H person can't make it to the event, you could have them fill out this checklist. You've got 10 tips for greening your 5S events, making them less harmful than what the impact can already be. Don't just throw everything into a dumpster, please. And then how to green your lean events in terms of ordering food and picking the right conference room and picking the right location and things like that. So those are just things to consider. So some tactical stuff. I mentioned the SIPOC, adding things to the value stream. Take the table I showed early on that had the different wastes and the impact to the environment. You can add that into your training material. That would be really great. Those checklists I mentioned, if you can incorporate those or you can send those out, they're free to share with anyone in your company. And get the ES&H and facility people involved in your lean events and Six Sigma projects if you don't already. Some more strategic things you can do is, do you have improvement efforts that are focused on those higher level metrics of energy usage and solid waste and water? Make sure that you try to align those into the business. It's not just the right thing to do, but how does that help us achieve our goals as a company? There should be some alignment there. So we actually have an ES&H performance metric that we use, and that's on our Rockwell Collins scorecard at the corporate level. So that helps. We can tie a lot of stuff into that effort. All process improvements will usually have a positive impact on the environment, so we just want you to capture those, start to document that, hey, this also has benefit. And please share this presentation, or there's been other good presentations from the conference on the same topic. Share that with your personnel when you get back. There's a lot of different books available. AME actually came out with a green manufacturing book about 10 years ago. There's some really good case studies in there that I suggest. There's Lean and Green, creating a Lean and Green business system, Six Sigma for sustainability, green your work, green process management, green to gold, lean sustainability, lean waste stream, green intentions, that's to do with value stream mapping. So there's lots of different resources that are out there now. Probably the last couple of years I've seen quite a few of these books come out. And these are the links to the EPA Toolkit. So there's one on lean and environment, lean energy and climate, lean in chemicals, lean in water, and Environmental Professional's Guide to Lean Six Sigma. So one of those might be interesting to you or someone at your company. So recommend sharing that with them if they're not familiar with these toolkits. So to summarize, focusing on lean can lead to green improvements. Focusing on the green improvements can lead to lean benefits. I went through 2 examples. Sustainability is good for business, not an extra cost. You can leverage Lean Six Sigma to address social and environmental issues at work and in your community. I've got a group I'm working at in Portland called Lean Portland, and we are Lean Six Sigma consultants that go work with nonprofits. And so if you want to learn more about that, we have a website, leanpdx.org. But that's the same kind of concept as what can we do to give back. Lean Six Sigma doesn't automatically address all sustainability issues, so you need some kind of focused effort around that. Use ES&H to help the bottoms-up activity and facilities with the top-down approach. And then there's a lot of good books and references and resources out there that are available. So with that, thank you for your time, and we'll take time for questions.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions?
Yeah.
You talked about that you had your presentations about their own personal use of green.
Yep.
Does that help generate some general ideas for the company also, or at least get that drive for managers or whatever might be in that area of department?
It was really geared towards getting people to think about personal use of it. Part of our green team mission was to just educate people, and if they take it home, I think that's a great start, because we know eventually it'll start to trickle back to work. So we really kind of focused on personal use at home, hoping that eventually it'll come back and impact it at work as well. Good question. Any other questions or comments? Yes. Yeah, I had some handouts, but if you can email me or connect with me, okay, got some extras. Anyone else need a handout? Yeah, a few more left. Yes, question? Oh, you need one. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Hold on 1 second.
Sorry.
Brian,
Sure.
on behalf of AME, we have a token of appreciation. Thank you very much for
thank
your
you.
presentation.
Thank you.